It feels like you're a part of God and you're seeing and interacting with God. So there's this sense of wholeness and greatness. And it was so weird. I suddenly understood madness. I understood people that are seemingly crazy. Hey guys, we are on our second video about psychedelics, and this time is going to be about Panaeolus Cyanescens. This particular strain of pan-cyan that I took is called ttbvi, which stands for Tamarind Tree, British Virgin Islands. So it was found on a tamarind tree, but that's the specific strain of pan-cyans that I took. I would say these are far beyond even Natalensis, which means they're really far beyond cubensis mushrooms. These are the kind of psychedelic that you're probably going to meet God on, and I mean that in a pretty literal sense. Obviously I went through a crazy experience on them, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I said Natalensis is something you shouldn't play around with. These are like severe warning, do not play around with. Probably gonna need a sitter. I did them without a sitter. I know I don't practice what I preach, but I am pretty experienced with stuff like this, and I didn't go overboard on the dosage. So I did 0.8 grams. But it wasn't overboard. Most people say once you hit 2 grams on these, you're in pretty dangerous territory. And you really need a sitter at that point. But I think if you stay under 1 gram on these, potentially you're okay. I would say that it was just like with Natalensis, I was right on the edge of where I would call it dangerous. So the image in the center here, that's what they look like. I'll put some other images up over the video for you to see how they actually look in normal lighting. Obviously I tweaked the colors for beauty's sake. They're thinner and more skinny and long than the other 2 species of mushrooms I've talked about. Their caps don't get nearly as wide. Normal cases, if you're giving them enough air exchange and also humidity, they will grow tall, very tall and thin, like more than 5 inches in length. Let's get into the actual trip report. One thing I want to differentiate with these and the other mushrooms I've talked about is they're about the same total length of time for the trip, but the peak of it is very front loaded on these. I think I may have said something kind of similar on Natalensis, but with these it's way more obvious. It's like the first 2 hours are very extreme. The 3rd hour is still in that extreme zone. And then suddenly on the last 3 hours or so, it is much more mild. You're much more clear-headed on these also. So I want to definitely differentiate them from other mushrooms in the sense that it's going to be much more intense, but it's going to be upfront in the first 3 hours, usually. Another thing I want to add is don't eat meat or anything heavy and fatty within a few hours of planning to take these. I would say give it 5 hours. If you have to snack beforehand, try to keep it before the 2-hour mark and make it fruit or something light and healthy. Don't eat sugar packed stuff. But I made the mistake of eating chicken a couple of, like maybe 2.5 to 3 hours beforehand, thinking it would have enough time to digest. Mostly it didn't, and it caused the trip to be, the first hour I was very sick to my stomach, very close to puking for like 2 hours, and it finally went away. Like I said, the trip's roughly 6 hours. My dosage was 0.8 grams. Remember, these, I didn't say it earlier, but these are about 3 times stronger than cubensis mushrooms. So in the first hour, the effects were 100% very close to being identical to what DMT is like, which is very interesting to me. DMT effects can have that same kind of hyper-realistic visual that I kind of mentioned on Natalensis, except on DMT it's more abstract. Tends to be like whatever you're looking at is going to become hyper sharp, like very clear and sharp, and the colors are going to pop and be brighter. And if there's movement, there might be trailing like tracer effects just a little bit, or echo. Sometimes you can call it like an echo effect, like a stutter of the image. You can see on my fake image here, the eye is kind of doing that stutter echo effect. It's kind of like that, not as extreme, but a more mild form of something like that. And it's not just going to be the eye. It would be like I was looking at a body in a video, and the person moving, it had a little bit of that kind of blurred echo effect when they moved, like a trippy looking movement. The other thing that was very much like DMT during that first hour is the divine hum that you sometimes hear on DMT and other psychedelics. Kind of hard to describe. It's just this vibration sound, and it's just sort of like you start hearing it, it kind of fades into your perception, and you hear it, and in a way you almost kind of feel it. Like you feel sort of a hypnotic euphoria as it comes on. I have notes, so I'm gonna be looking at those a bit. Now during that first hour, because I had a feeling this was gonna be even more intense than the Natalensis, I decided to mess around with any kind of sexual exploration I wanted to do at the beginning before it hit too hard. And I did do a little of that, but I knew it was coming on so much stronger and faster than expected that by that hour mark, I was already like, I need to go prepare more and like lay down and forget about anything like that. So I went to the bedroom as the effects started becoming overwhelming. And another thing I noticed is I felt extremely cold, like I was dead already cold. Like my body was just freezing. I almost felt like maybe the blood wasn't pumping as well into my extremities as it normally would. So it was like they were going numb and feeling cold. I got into the bed, kind of expecting to get very cozy, not knowing what was coming next. And I began to feel a sense of decay. And this happened on the other mushroom. It happens a lot, actually. On any high dose of any mushroom, I tend to get this sense of, while I'm laying, I'm kind of like rotting, decaying, like I'm aging all of a sudden. And the inner voice within myself, which I wasn't sure if it was technically coming from me or like an external spirit, like the mushroom spirit, because on these there's not as many entities as there were on Natalensis. Most of this, it feels like you're a part of God and you're seeing and interacting with God, or the ultimate thing, whatever you want to call it, the all-encompassing everything. So if you want to consider that an entity, then yes, that's what you're interacting with. But you have this sense of everything you're looking at, no matter what it is part of that. So there's this sense of wholeness and greatness. It's not like separate entities or deities like on Natalensis, which is it's a very different trip because of that. So while I was laying down and starting to feel that sense of decay, my inner voice seemed to imply that I needed to move or get up and dance. And once again, that was a theme that came up with Natalensis also. And images popped into my mind and that seemed to tell me that movement shakes off death and disease and dark energy. And the cultures who dance a lot, like it's part of their actual rituals, that is for a reason. Movement is life, basically, is what I was being told. So I did already mention also that I had eaten meat before the trip, and it had not digested all the way, even though it had been 3 hours. But my stomach was definitely starting to feel intense digestive issues, and these mushrooms felt even more intense than Natalensis as far as that goes. Not only did I feel like I was on the verge of vomiting for the first couple of hours, but I had this intense pressure and gas in my stomach. It was pretty painful. Like at some points I was not sure I felt like it was going to ruin the trip. It was so bad, but it did fade. I also ate raw ginger at one point to try and help. You don't want to eat much when you're on these because your stomach is super sensitive, but ginger does have properties that supposedly relax the muscles in your gut, basically in your stomach, and it's supposed to help with general nausea. So I can see now and understand now why spiritual people always talk about fasting before they do like a ritual or some important, milestone in their practices. I think it is because heavier foods tend to ground you here in a spiritual sense, if you believe in anything like that, which I do, obviously. Now, right about when I was feeling all that illness and the whole thing about moving more, I started to notice louder external energies, is what I'm calling it. Like, it wasn't my own spirit. It wasn't me. It was something external. So these energies seem to be getting louder, and they seem to have their own intentions for me, which I did not really like. They were definitely like separate voices or external influences. Now, I have an ex who almost, I would say like 50% of my trips, they seem to show up, and it's not the ex that I mentioned in my Natalensis video who I see positively. This is an ex that I see negatively, and they had always obsessed over me in a dangerous or bad way in the past, and she keeps showing up in trips. And what's weird about it is it's someone that I don't think about, I don't like to think about, and they're into weird voodoo shit. I think that's part of her heritage. So what freaks me out about it is she almost deliberately shows up sometimes, and I can sense her personality in this energy, dancing around and laughing because she knows what she's doing. And it's the weirdest. I've never experienced stuff like that before, really. It's wild. But anyways, it seemed to be that energy showing up. And my cat always gets loud and meows a lot when I feel that, which is even weirder. It's like he senses it too. But he was doing that, and I felt pressure to remove him from my room, but I knew he would just get louder at the door. So I felt like I needed to leave him in there, but his meowing was it was like his energy needed my full attention for some reason. And at the same time, it felt like her energy was doing the same thing simultaneously. I know this all sounds weird, but just roll with it. So I was fighting in my mind to maintain my definition of self, and this is when I've never had a true like ego death on any psychedelic, but this was starting to approach that kind of thing. And just when everything was about to get to a breaking point where it was too much to take, it all became nothingness, like a black void. But it wasn't a totally black void. It was more like you're in space far away from everything, and maybe there's particles or something around you. That's the best way I could define it. Now remember, that everything I just described, like that rise to an overwhelming point, that was about hour 2. So the first hour was more like DMT visuals and a nice hypnotic sensual feeling. The second hour was more like this overwhelming, every sound and every light was too much. I had to turn the lights off. The sound, my cat's sound and everything else was just too overwhelming. And then everything became nothingness right at the end of that hour 2. And I would say I had a bit of an ego death type of thing then. So hour 3 is basically the final rise in the peak. And starting at that point, I was just in a void. Like I said, that hour 2 ended off with me just being in nothingness and not really remembering who I was for a minute. I was not fully defined yet, like as what am I, who am I? I didn't even remember my physical form's look or shape. And I just began like slowly moving in this void. And this is when I started having faint images of people I've crossed paths with, usually creative people, and surprisingly a lot of them are musicians. So in the last year, I've met 2 of these people in person that are on the screen right now. So there's sort of this weird correlation with like my creative side and spiritual side, and these certain creative people I cross paths with that are also spiritual. I just wanted to add right here that I'm leaving a plethora of other artists off that I've met over the last few years. I think when I was younger, I tended to idolize creative people, and as you grow older and you actually meet these people, if you spend more than a few minutes around any of them, you see that they are human beings, and human beings are flawed. Even the ones that I would consider spiritual, I've seen them do a few things that are human, I would say. I don't want it to seem like I'm elevating anyone in this. It's just that there's certain symbolic things and sort of an unspoken commonality. That's sort of how these particular people came into the trip that I had, and that's how it relates to it. So all of them are people that I kind of admired, or at least knew through the other artists or friends. But I've met a guy named Travis Edgedy, who's these middle 2 pictures, and his artist name is Picture Plane. He He also has a side project called Scythe that is like dungeon synth type stuff. And this girl is named Vitesse X. She's kind of like ethereal music. Left is named Brothel. He's also kind of a darker electronic artist. Which I haven't actually met him, but the reason they're all on the screen is because when I was in this void of nothingness, I started having weird flashes of particularly Picture Plane or Travis. When he does live sets, especially like as Scythe, but all of his videos and projects, there will be all these artists do like hand gestures and stuff, and it's like this weird spiritual undertone to it. I tried to find images kind of implying what I'm talking about. I don't even know what the meaning is for each person individually, but just as a whole, there's this sort of unspoken thing with esoteric magic and symbolism, and it's just all under the surface with their music. And last year I met Travis and also Vitesse X. They were in town for a bigger show they were doing, but they did a small show for Travis's side project at a very small venue, and it was like 10 people there. So I got to talk to both of them. I talked to Vitesse X for like an hour about spiritual stuff and how she wound up where she is musically. And so all of this stuff inspire, it's like on a personal level, it's inspiring and it matters to me. But what's weird is when I'm in this void, I'm seeing flashes of Travis doing these touching his face in certain ways that were very like specific movements and very symbolic. And because I couldn't even see or think of who I was, I started following that as a guide. And it makes no sense to me, really. Like, why would that pop in my head? But I was tracing my eyebrow, or just the brow line on my face. And when I did that, I started remembering my shape, and I traced down the nose bridge to the tip of the nose. And as I was doing this with the forefinger and thumb, I was suddenly remembering everything, like remembering my shape. But it was like I was reforming, and all this symbolism was popping into my mind about these creative people I had known, but also other more mystical stuff. I tend to see eyes a lot on these trips, divine eyes that are just looking at you and all-knowing and sort of piercing through you. I started actually remembering my facial shape, like my actual human form during that. And after kind of seeing all those hand gestures and everything popping into my mind, I was sort of imitating those. And as I was remembering who I was and feeling my human form out again, remembering, oh yeah, that's what I look like, that's who I am. I kind of was thinking about these people at the same time and what all that meant. And all I could make of it is that because everything's a projection from within us, there's hidden symbolism in all these things that I like that are meant to guide me. So I felt like I needed to just take as much information as I could with me. I wasn't sure I would remember all this after the trip. It's like it's just meant as sort of a reminder, like feel yourself out. If you're losing sense of self or this ego, you basically have to know yourself, the whole know thyself thing. I just thought I need to remember this next time I have this happen, basically. And that's when I kind of arched my back and stretched way back, chest out, arms and legs really back. I mean, I'm laying on my bed, so I'm doing wild stretches. My body had felt like it had rotted into this nothingness before. So as I'm stretching, I start seeing divine wing symbols, but in 3D. So they were these weird wing shapes kind of interlocking in an L pattern all around me, like multiple wings sort of drifting in around me and interweaving together. I have multiple versions of what I'm talking about, but they were kind of like these Egyptian wings, ignoring the center art because there was no art on them. They were just like white plain wings that stretched really long and thin like this. And like I said, they were L shapes, so it was like if these were weaving kind of like this, but you repeat that over and over and over all around me in different directions. And in 3D too, so it wasn't just on a flat plane. It was like they were weaving around me. You know, if you repeated this like 100 more times, it was like that. But this is just sort of a 2D flat art version of it. Another example of what I was seeing was kind of like this symbolism. These wings these are from Babylonian and Zoroastrian art, which is even older than it's before Abrahamic religions in places like Iran, like whatever they were before they were Iran. So it's a very old religion, but they were kind of like these types of wings. And like I said, there's that interlocking crisscrossing. But ultimately, as that was all forming, it became a whole lot more like these, like seraphim. You know, we think angel imagery and like if they're biblically accurate, quote unquote, we always see them as this freaky, like wings and eyes all over the place. But it really is like that. You will see when you're around this divine thing you're communing with, it really will show these strange images of like wings interlocking and eyes. I was starting to see eyes. They weren't scary. They're very truthful. It's like you see these eyes piercing at you, but they aren't scary. They're also not happy-go-lucky either, though. They're not smiling, happy eyes. They're eyes that see the truth. They just stare calmly. I wouldn't say it felt loving, but I guess they're loving. Like it's like they just want to know you, to see you, and for you to see and understand them. I keep saying it's like God looking at itself. That's the best way I can describe it. It's more of a feeling, in other words. It's very hard to put into words. But basically, all those interlocking wings became these sort of fractalized wing, three-dimensional shapes like these. And there were eyes occasionally, but not always. The wings come up a lot, along with certain other animals or animal parts in my visions on different psychedelics. And I'm starting to think and interpret this recurring bird and wing theme as a symbol for freedom, spiritual freedom, and freedom from this planet, which feels like you're locked and heavy on it. And I feel like the more spiritual I get, the more I'm starting to see this type of imagery. And I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with that information, but I'm starting to see or feel it during these moments. Like I feel that sense of freedom. It's showing me that there is freedom if you elevate yourself. The more you elevate out of the materialistic mindset that everyone else is in. Also, there's so much stuff we do that keeps us weighed down here. I don't want to go into like a lecture on that, but I'm just saying there is this weird symbolism about freedom, and I think that's what the wings keep popping up to show me. They just have this sense of being untied to anything here and being completely and totally free. Yeah, I wrote a note that all these wings and imagery felt very ancient and very along the lines of like angels and seraphim and all that. And I started seeing, when I was seeing the eyes, they weren't all human looking. Some of them were more like a falcon's eye with sort of the pattern around the eye, the way I don't even know what you call that, but like the eyelids. When you see Egyptian eye art, a lot of those are falcon eyes, and it's like they have that black rim around them. It was kind of like that. So I was seeing different types of eyes. It wasn't just those. It was during this that I started feeling a sense of myself being pure divine love looking back at itself. So all the images I was seeing, I felt this huge appreciation for. There was a sense of bliss, gentleness, but also certainty. That's what I was saying earlier. It's this sense of strong, firm certainty that this is the truth, and you're witnessing the truth, and you know the truth now. I felt like I was seeing past the reality that we see day to day, basically, and that it wasn't scary. It felt divine, and it made me realize that what I live through every day is not something to stress over or be caught up in, because there's so much more past that. I mentioned the wings seeming to feel like freedom. The message to me was, your soul is this free if you let go of attachment to the ego, the body, or the avatar. Yeah, so basically what I already said. From that stillness in the void, after touching my face and starting to remember who I was and kind of starting to decide, like, well, what do I stand for? Who am I really? Because it was like I was rebuilding myself in this moment, forming firm virtues, as far as virtues or values, like who am I really, you know? So from that stillness and that beginning to move, I started moving my arms and hands in a very flowing way that was kind of like interpretive dance. Like you're just, you know, watch a goth dance at the goth club when they're doing the it was like that, only laying down, and slow. It was very slow because I was still kind of figuring out my body. Even it was like being reborn. What was interesting is when I started moving my arms like that, each hand gesture and arm movement seemed to cause things to manifest. It was like painting things into reality. And remember, I'm just in this void in space with points of light around me that I would describe as particles around me. So as I was moving my hand and arm gestures around, those particles were sort of just morphing or creating whole scenes, like whole images of parts of my life. And they weren't really things I have experienced, so they weren't the past. They were like, what do you want? Create what you want. You're the artist right now, is basically the feeling I got. And so as these things were forming, I'm just slowly learning I need to keep myself in a positive vibe, basically, because I'm creating everything. I started realizing if I'm miserable, I'm gonna create misery. So it changed how I look at a lot of things in that sense. And I know for some people, when it comes to spirituality, those are common sense things, but it's different when you experience it live in the millisecond as you make a movement or gesture. Because if you're living out years at a time, it can be easy to slip into stagnancy where you're not creating or growing, and it doesn't seem that negative. But when instantly stuff is happening with one arm gesture, you realize your feelings matter, and how you feel on a day-to-day basis is affecting your reality. So I was basically learning that in real time while moving and painting reality. So I began to try envisioning beauty and happiness as I painted strokes with my arm movements. I felt beautiful moments in my life, and it seemed to all be flowing in random ways, but I tried to maintain the feeling, and I capitalized the word feeling. I tried to maintain the feeling of happiness and bliss, as I intuitively knew that that was important now. During the trip, themes of death and decay versus growth and vibrance came up a lot. Just like the Natalensis trip, those came up a lot. At one moment, I ran my hand through my hair, which is thinning, it's been thinning for about a year now because I stopped taking medication for it. So I kept running my hand through my hair over and over, and my eyes were closed again at that point, and I felt like I was just still floating in a void. Interesting thing, I started just feeling my scalp, like at the base of my hair, and it felt good to touch that for some reason. And I had this epiphany about how the body is just an avatar and the soul's eternal. So immediately I understood why monks and Buddhists that are serious about their growth will shave their head. You know, it's just such a common thing for monks to shave their head. I just started realizing that everything tied to your body's image is its ego, and it's tying you here. It's like a weight that holds you down and causes you start focusing on the external. So you latch on to your body or the avatar that you're in as a spirit, and that just holds you back, was the main thing I took away from it. I remembered laughing and saying to God, or this divine being, or my higher self, basically. I remember saying, well, shit, I just ordered more hair medicine a week ago. It's gonna show up soon. And I'm sitting here considering shaving all my hair off. And I just remember finding that kind of funny and chuckling about it for a minute, because I kept seeing images of if I just let my hair go and shaved it off, a lot of things in my life would change and improve. It seemed like such a dumb, simple thing, but it was basically like if I could just let go of one thing tied to my ego or my body, it would allow me to rise higher spiritually away from this body that's tying me down. I was shown or told telepathically with feelings and images that death happens when you stop growing, and I had this sense of being extremely vibrant and not tired at all. This particular strain of mushroom, I would say, it's very stimulant, but without the racing heart that I usually get on any stimulant. And I hate that racing heart feeling. So what it was like is I just never felt tired the entire trip, even on into morning when normally I'm frustrated that I can't sleep. I wasn't really concerned about it. And I didn't feel wired either. My mind was clear and crisp. And I didn't feel like jittery, like, oh, I gotta do something, I gotta move. Early on, yes, you do feel a sense of needing to move, but I'm saying near the end of the trip, the last 3 hours, you're very clearly awake, but without any of the jitteriness or weird sketchy feelings that a stimulant would normally give you. I also wasn't hungry at all the way until the end when I chose to eat food. But I also felt very peaceful, calm, and at ease. Yeah, so it's like a stimulant without the edginess of a stimulant, basically. Now, at this point, I wanted to mention that throughout the trip, I saw a lot of animal imagery, especially during the peak. Obviously, the wings and some of the eyes were animal, birds and deer themes. And remember on the Natalensis video, I mentioned that I saw this black deer skull that was all fractaled and morphed into a onyx stone, like a black stone. So deer keep coming up in my life, and I see a lot of deer in real life when I'm out driving where I live. And I do feel a sense of special appreciation for them. Like I feel an emotional tie to them for some reason. Every time I see them, it makes me happy. And I feel a sense of peace when I see them. So there is a meaningfulness to them popping up a lot. I'm just not sure what it means, honestly. But during this, I got a bunch of deer pictures. Whoops. I remember looking at one in the images that were popping into my mind, and everything I'm seeing is like in real life looking. It's 3D realistic, like I was out in the woods and right in front of a real deer, basically. So a real looking deer just looked at me kind of like at a slight angle. I believe it was a younger female deer, so it had that very shiny innocent looking eyes. And I remember my vision locked in on the eye, like I was looking at directly in one of its eyes, and I felt an intense connection to it. Like once again, it felt like God looking back at me. And later on, I looked at my cat the same way, and it felt so weird to feel myself in this creature looking back at me. And I felt intensely divine, like pure, unconditional love and appreciation. And also just this sense of beauty, like appreciation for how beautiful any creature is that's living. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It was just awe. And it's weird because I knew as this entity that came from me. If I'm part of the creator, then obviously, the creator made these animals or creatures or life. And so it was this weird sense of like, if you painted a painting and stood back and admired it and felt a lot of emotion about it, it was like that, only, all these living creatures. Yeah, I just mentioned looking into the deer's eye. It felt like I was all of creation looking in at itself with endless awe and appreciation. I thought back to the peak of the trip earlier where I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind. And I had another epiphany. I thought about homeless people and crazy people on the street and anyone who seems to be a little mental. I started understanding that those are a part of me too. Everything's you pushed out, that cliche phrase. I started understanding craziness because I was on the verge of, it really wasn't madness though. It's just that you see past what this reality is. And it was so weird. I suddenly understood madness. I understood people that are seemingly crazy and they're like their body's moving all crazy because they're tweaked out on shit. Some of them aren't though. That's the thing. Some of them, they're just mentally different and it had nothing to do with drugs. They're just we just say they're mental if you want to be messy with your words. But yeah, it's like people that are kind of spacey like that, they may just be seeing past reality. That's the way I interpreted it. Some people may just be, they lost their mind because they don't have this facade that we see to keep us sane, basically. So I had an understanding of them, and the word reverence came up again. That came up a lot in the previous trip, the Natalensis trip. But I had a lot of reverence for these people and what they go through trying to survive in this world we live in. It felt like in a way that they are also just the universe looking back at me in one of its many forms. And I thought about how I always avoid eye contact with anyone who seems off or unstable, or really anyone at all, honestly. I also began having this insight that I look down a lot, and I avoid connection with pretty much every human I come across other than lovers, which is true. I don't maintain a lot of eye contact unless it's someone I'm intimate with, basically, because it feels super intimate to me. So at that point, my mind went back to the musicians from earlier and all their symbolic hand gestures. And I had an image of one of them gesturing to their eyes and then gesturing up. It was like I kept hearing in my mind, look up, open your eyes, see the truth, look up, open your eyes. And it just kept, when I actually physically looked up and opened my eyes to see more clearly during that, metaphysically or spiritually, I suddenly felt like I saw everything. I was like, I really am shutting out half the world on a daily basis. And I'm holding back, I'm afraid to connect with other people. So it was like my sight became clear as day when I physically looked up during this. And I accepted that I need to change my tendency to avoid human connection. I was smiling with this sense of joy from seeing so much truth during this experience. I felt like I finally understood so much about why spiritual people would do certain things like sit or lay certain ways or fast before a important ritual. So that was it. That was the end of the peak, which is it was the first 3 hours of the trip. Now hours 4, 5, and 6, everything kind of ramps down. You're still definitely tripping, like you can't just go drive or something during the last 3 hours, but you're much more able to function in the real world again. Before the peak was over completely, I did a little bit of experimentation with how I perceived myself. Since I had already figured out that I could create the world I wanted, I was curious if I could create the physical avatar or body that I wanted in that moment. And I mentioned in the Natalensis video that I've always felt like I had what they would call like a twin spirit or a soul that's sort of got a masculine and a feminine side. It's not like separate personalities, it's just separate expressions of the same self, basically. I think this concept's a little hard for some people to understand if they're accustomed to just sticking with society's status quo or standards. But what I mean is that as you become more spiritual and you realize that you are a fragment of a larger conscious entity that likes to explore itself through all these people, all the animals that exist, all forms of consciousness. It's all this one thing expressing itself in different ways. So once you kind of advance yourself to a certain point, you realize you can do that with yourself. You can explore the soul and express your soul in different ways. For some people, they don't want to do that. It doesn't appeal to them, and that's fine. But for me, it's become an important thing to me because it allows a lot more versatile experiences, and I understand emotions and feelings and the body in so many different ways just from exploring my conscious mind in that manner. So it's basically that. It's not as simplistic as someone saying, oh, it sounds like you're just gay or you just want to be a girl so you're trans. It's not really that at all because I prefer to date women. I'm attracted to women, but I just like to express my spirit in different ways. And you would be surprised how many women there are who enjoy males who also have the ability to express feminine traits sometimes. Society wants you to believe that women want you to act like this bearded lumberjack alpha male all the time, but a lot of women enjoy a male with more variety than that. And my most recent long-term relationship was with a beautiful girl who loved the different traits and sides of me. Like, she's as versatile as I am in that regard, and it's just proved to me that consciousness likes to explore, and people who are simultaneously on the same level can explore that way together even. Like I was drawn to her because of her spiritual side and her intelligence. So it's interesting to me how spiritual people will gravitate towards each other, or people that are on the same mental landscape or plane, they will be drawn together. So it's just not as simplistic as the average person wants it to be for them to feel comfortable. Spirituality gets way beyond what is comfortable. So I tried to envision my body in a female form, and I just tried to think of a form that I would like, basically, that would be aesthetically pleasing to me. I also thought about elements of nature that would sort of be infused in her energy or symbolizing her. It's hard to explain what I mean by that, but it was like I wanted things related to nature that would be symbolic of her personality. So what this manifested as was my mental image of my body literally morphing into a female one that felt, in my mind's eye, real. I could see my form as it would be, or as it was in it, but I could feel it in my mind. It was like it was there, including, having breasts and everything, like different body and everything. So along with that, I had this vision of cherry blossom branches all around me in a pattern kind of emanating out from behind me, almost like I was a painting, and behind me the branches were painted in a pleasing way, and they were blooming. So it was like cherry blossom flowers blooming off these really nice looking branches all around. And I decided that plant would be what represented this form. And she had a very soft, youthful, and playful vibe. Definitely it felt realistic, like everything about me felt real, but it was only for a few seconds. It didn't last long. And that's when things mostly wind down, but I remained contemplative and blissful, going over a plethora of events and ideas in my mind in a mostly relaxed way. One big thing that I began to wrap my head around is that this really is all a kind of simulation, but our bodies are organic and real, and they do have limits. That being said, I could feel how my spirit or consciousness is totally separate from my body, and how I'm eternal. Something I really enjoyed during all this was how I felt no hunger and no tiredness. Yeah, once again, those were really noticeable, because usually I feel like my stomach digesting food. I feel tired by the end of it, mentally and physically, and none of that was really as noticeable this time. Your spirit really feels free. It's almost like if you had died and you have this release of all the pressures of living gone, but it's not in a scary way. It's not, oh my god, I died. It's like, oh, I'm free. Fuck, I'm free. I'm so happy. So it's almost hard to come back. But normally at the tail end of a trip, I'm physically and mentally exhausted. My mind will remain very wired and active usually. I would often struggle to fall asleep as the sun rises, and anxiety arises with that, like, oh no, I have to go to sleep, the sun's coming up. But this time on these, I was very calm yet awake, with a very clear head, a clear mind. I wasn't worried about what time it was, even as 6, 7, or 8 a.m. came around. I thought about how there are specific spiritual people peppered or dotted all around me in my life, and how it seemed they were fairly rare. I almost had to seek them out, or it's like the universe kind of put them in my path. It wasn't like I tried hard to find them. I did come to the conclusion that many people are on earlier parts of the spiritual path, and that means as I evolve, I'm going to have less and less people who understand what I'm going through. It's going to grow ever more lonely. This led to me realizing times where my shadow side soured meaningful moments with other spiritual people, including some of the creative people I admire. So it was like the darker aspects of me sabotaged connections that would have led to beauty and positive energy for both me and the other people involved. To me, that's sort of what evil is. It's when we damage or block ourselves and others from having positive and loving experiences that would elevate us all. So something this trip kind of made me realize is I want to work on making genuine connections with people like this that are important to me creatively. So as the trip approached the end and I got ready to fall asleep, I felt like I had taken a treasure trove of information that was important, and I was blessed with the chance to bring it all back with me and remember all of it, because I had a very clear memory of most of the trip. I felt thankful for life, but also immediately longed to go back to the state of eternal bliss I had just come from. It felt like home in a way, which is, yeah, it was like a longing to go back already as I was coming down to earth. The sense of appreciation for everything carried with me for several days, though. I often see deer when I'm driving through neighborhoods right before sunset, and I would just smile and tear up about how beautiful and peaceful they looked. I also thought about how I still have trouble connecting with people, and that's going to be one of the larger challenges for me in life. I feel like I block people off because they have so many expectations and their own sort of assumptions and desires for you that they just expect you to fall in line with. It's like they dream up something about you and they want you to fit that in their mind, and I don't always fit what they want. I don't always want what they want. And so there's an overwhelming, suffocating feeling when dealing with people. And also, so many people are so far removed from where I am spiritually, it's very hard to relate to almost anyone. So when I meet people, if they feel like they're kind of on that same journey, it just feels good to know there's someone else that understands. To have a conversation like I did with Vites X, it's just reassuring to know that other creative people, they went through struggles, and she's been vocal about the things she told me at that event. She later said again on a live stream to a group, so I'm not exposing personal stuff or anything, but she had like a mental break at one point for like a year, had to reintegrate. It was some sort of spiritual thing happened to her, and music was what got her out of a deep, dark place, and that is really meaningful to me. So I don't know, it's just weird. Like, there's so many uncanny weird things when you're dealing with what this trip meant and how I still interpret it. In the grand scheme of my personal life, it's extremely meaningful. I definitely had more appreciation at the end of all this about how diverse and unique everyone as a whole is, and that they all are here in different places for a reason. So I'm much more understanding that everyone's in a different phase of their life, and people who seem chaotic or messy or just plain ignorant, they're just in the learning phase. They're heading down the path at some point, and if they don't, they'll literally rot away and die. I mean, that's literally what I was told, is that if you're not spiritually growing, you're then on the path to death. It just helped me to let go of the past and let go of hurt and the desire for revenge when it comes to people that have hurt me in the past due to their own ignorance and spiritual lowness, I guess I would call it. Like, I know it sounds arrogant when I say stuff like that, but I don't mean it in an arrogant way. I just mean there's literally some people that haven't done any work, and they hurt everyone around them because they don't understand yet that they're hurting themselves when they do that. So they are kind of ignorant spiritually. All in all, I would say this was the pinnacle of experiences I've had so far on any psychedelic. And it wasn't necessarily all fun or euphoric. There were sensual and euphoric moments, but there was also very scary, overwhelming moments. So I would say it was a challenging trip, just like the Panaeolus one, but ultimately the immense beauty that I saw during it was worth any hardship. I felt like I had faced death once again and was no longer afraid of it. I also felt less attached to my ego, avatar, or physical body by the end of it. I still care to a degree, but now that I've seen the truth, it's kind of pointless to be image conscious about the body, once you know that it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. I would recommend having a lot of experience with psychedelics and spirituality to do the Pan-Cyans or Panaeolus Cyanescens, but these are far and beyond your typical cubensis mushrooms. These are not even the same ballpark. They feel different too. They don't even feel similar. I would say even if you are experienced, you need a safe, trustworthy sitter, because you are kind of incapacitated at the peak. So you need someone you can trust not to mess with your body or something while you're laying there. I would also recommend, like I said earlier, don't eat meat or anything heavy or fatty beforehand, because your body's still gonna be digesting it and it's just gonna feel like shit. Trust me. You don't want to be feeling like you have vomit in the top of your throat when you're about to see God. It doesn't feel good, trust me. Body movement or dancing seem to help with like the pressure and gas in the stomach. You have to follow your intuition a lot throughout this process, and that's why knowing thyself is basically imperative. Like doing spiritual preparation and inner work in the coming weeks beforehand would help. I've already been doing that. That's why I waited 1 week between Natalensis and this, and that was enough time. I had already been preparing up to those points. You need to know what your values are and have pure intentions, because when you lose your sense of self, it can be disorienting and scary if you don't know who you truly are. That was one thing when I felt those external influences that seemed, I would say, negative. They had desires for me that weren't good, basically. I had to kind of say, well, that's not what I want. I kept saying, I don't want that. That's not me. And I eventually was like, this is who I am. This is what I want. So that's basically it. I hope that the report helped you understand this divine tool, I would call it. It's definitely something you need to be using consciously for a reason. I wouldn't just take them and hop into randomness. Like, you can take them without having a specific concrete goal, but you need to know that the purpose is to better yourself, basically. It's definitely life-changing, I think. And you do have to try to integrate this stuff and bring it back. But what's interesting about this mushroom is I was able to bring back so much more than on trips with like Cubensis, where I'll have divine knowledge and then forget it by the time the trip's over. It's easier to bring things back on this, which is interesting to me. Just come humble, prepared. I think it's a priceless thing. It's worth going through the rougher parts. Thank you guys for watching these trip reports. I'm hoping they really give people a solid idea of how profound these particular substances can be, and I would appreciate if you like and subscribe and click the ding-a-ling, the little bell, so that you know when I release a new trip report or anything else spiritual related. I super duper appreciate the people that have been here from the tarot card days and that have stayed as I kind of evolve the channel. I'm still going to do all those other topics, but maybe just not as often. So stick around, and thank you once again for watching this. Bye bye.